So what you believe is the way it's going to be. That's really what it comes down to. The person who tells the best story is going to be telling history. That is how it's going to go down. If you look through history, if you think about what it is that you know about what it is that's going on, it was always being done by the person who has told the best story. And the one that is told the most common, the one that everybody hears, the story that everybody is knowing is the one that is ultimately going to be the truth. Now, it doesn't matter what the truth really is. It's what it is that you believe, and what you believe is your truth, and whatever it is that you believe in is the way it's going to be. So it doesn't matter what it is that's actually happening out there. Whoever tells the best story is going to be dictating history. So this is one of the reasons that I love coming out here on YouTube and sharing the idea of the credible threat theory is that YouTube gives me the ability to document over time what it is that I feel is truly taking place, not only within the economy, but then within monetary policy, and then the narrative that is also being delivered with it. So when I talk about the credible threat theory, I am really trying to share what it is that's happening in history through the best story, because to me, the credible threat theory is the best story. Now, when you listen to the mainstream media narrative out there, and if that is the only thing that has really been delivering information to the individual, it makes it very difficult to then receive what it is that the information inside of the credible threat theory is trying to deliver. Ultimately, because you have to change your belief system. And changing a belief system is very, very difficult. Let me make sure the Wi-Fi is turned off here. All right. Is audio coming through? I'm guessing so. All right. So, as I shared the credible threat theory and thinking back all the way to the earliest days that I tried to start the credible threat theory with, which is Ben Bernanke's speech back in 2002, the story that I tell is completely different from what it is that everybody else has ever heard, believed, or thought. And to try and change the belief system of everybody who has then incorporated this idea of what it took place during the great financial crisis and the quantitative easing programs and all the chaos that kind of came from that, as they have taken on their belief system of that, the credible threat theory has deviated away from what it is that a lot of people actually believe out there. Mainly that the Federal Reserve was looking for, wanting, and received inflation and inflation expectations. How it is that we tell this story is very difficult because it literally has to change the belief systems out there. So when I share the story, the credible threat theory, and I try to share it in its entirety, it ends up becoming a very long and boring and, cumbersome way of trying to understand how it is that the Federal Reserve was looking for this inflation expectation, considering that they were at the lower bound. This becomes very difficult for those people out there, especially those who are in the idea of end the Fed. Like I got my end the Fed hat on. Of course, you can't read it because it's backwards because YouTube is weird. And it flips the image. But ultimately, the idea of even ending the Fed and that the Federal Reserve is causing pain and suffering and misery through their devaluing dollar and the inflationary pressure that comes from money printing, that mindset within itself literally saved the Federal Reserve. Like, I don't know how many people know that. And then when I try to share how that happened, it is such a hard thing to receive. Like, it is heartbreaking for a lot of the end the Fed individuals. And I'm like, no, man, I'm an end the Fed individual too. I just read through this monetary policy in such a way that it then came to my understanding that the Federal Reserve was in desperate, desperate need of inflation. And to know why that was taking place and then to see it get delivered, it's like, no way. No way. It was like almost handed to him on this silver platter. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't mean to laugh at that, but like literally, it was such, it was such an overwhelming, like, thing to see happen. Okay, here's the thing. This is why I almost become speechless on it. Is because in the Fed's speeches, within the Fed's own words, they were looking for a reflationary shock to the economy. Now, this came from Lael Brainerd in May of 2019. This is from the FOMC, like, people who are conducting monetary policy were talking about a reflationary shock to the economy. Now, to see it actually happen just a few years later, and then people point at the Federal Reserve and say, oh, look at all this inflation you're causing and all this problem. And they were like, yeah, finally, we get it. And now I have the papers, like, not the papers, I got the PDF files on a computer, but I got the speeches, right? I got all the documents, everything that I have tried to share over the last 7 years of this channel. Actually, it's longer now. It's going on almost 8 years. That I've been on this channel sharing what it is that I have discovered through the Fed's own words. Like when I took off to understand what it was that was happening here within the economy, and I was using this channel to share that information with, I essentially was creating a journal here, and I started diving into the Federal Reserve's own speeches, and it would take me days to read through these speeches. Like I would spend a day just reading one paragraph over and over again, try to understand what it was that they were communicating inside of this paragraph. It seems so different from what it is that I had ever heard out there from everybody else. And here it is, it's communicated right within their own words. And so as I started studying these things and breaking them down one by one and sharing them here again and again on the channel, I realized that I am deviating away from what it is that the common belief is out there, the mainstream media narrative, the absolute history that is being told. I'm deviating away from it and thinking, nah, I got the history here. I know I'm telling the best story. I'm telling the story directly from the Fed's own words. How could it be wrong? Like people say, oh, they're just making that up. And I think to myself, for the uneducated economist to read, like that can possibly be the case. This is hidden from the mainstream media. This is hidden from academics. I don't know why. Like they feed them a little bit of it. There's pieces of it out there, and I see other people talking about it, but the entirety of it seems to be very close to view. It's not being told within the story, right? Because see, whoever tells the best story is telling history. And if they don't tell the story of truth that comes from that, what it is that was actually happening, but tell you the truth of something else that was far deviated from that view, it doesn't matter. That's the history that is being told. And that's the way it'll be. See, this is why I'm constantly out here sharing it. I mean, I thought about this last night as I was thinking, well, what do I talk about next? Like, I've shared the credible threat theory so much out there that how is it that I could possibly come out and share any more information about it in order to, like, get that aha moment for people? You know, because I think that's what a lot of individuals are looking for. Like, to me, I don't question a lot of stuff out there. I'm not searching for answers to anything. I'm just absorbing information as I go through life. I'm looking at the restaurants. I look to see how many people are in there, who's eating, like how many kids are in there, you know, what it is that they might be ordering. Is this a couple on a date? Is this a family, you know, reunion? What's going on here within this? Is this a casual hangout? You know, these are the things that I think about because it means a lot to an economist. To most people, they don't care. That's not the way they go through life. So as I think about what it is that's happening out there in the world, and I think about what it is that most people end up believing, it's what it is that the best story being told. What it is that's like, I listen to the people at work sometimes, and I try to explain to them what it is that I see happening within the lumber industry. And a lot of them, like, don't get me wrong, a lot of them who are working right next to me say, don't you just understand it's greed and manipulation, and obviously it was Biden's fault. And I'm like, you're right here, man. You're right in the exact same spot I am. There is no difference between me and them. Not anything that's going on. This computer right here, it has the same information that they can seek out. There's no difference in any of it. And yet they called it greed and manipulation and Biden's fault. And that's what they truly believed. And it was like I tried to explain them in all the other ways. It was just too over their head. They couldn't get it. But it's much easier to say, right there. That's it. Plain and simple. Walk out, go crack some beers, and think about something else. Okay? And I'm not trying to pick on anybody individually. I'm serious about that. But it's so complicated, and it's such a difficult story to try and understand that it's not the best story. The best story is Biden's fault. Like, I wouldn't know if it was Biden's fault or not. I never listened to him because I didn't find anything that he said that to be important enough. So that wasn't the best story for me. The best story was the one that I was researching, the one that I was going and putting together. The one where I realized that there was issues taking place within the lumber industry long before COVID kicked in. And sharing that understanding gave me the understanding of what was happening within lumber, so I could tell a lumber story that was far different from what everybody else was telling out there. And considering nobody knew what the hell was going on within lumber, there wasn't anybody telling a lumber story. It was just me, right? Everybody else was trying to make something up, and I actually had a story to tell about lumber. And it was the most accurate one out there. And it was so accurate that it got me noticed all over the place. Because, again, there was nobody else telling a lumber story like I was telling it. But here it is. I try to tell the truth in a monetary policy story. Not so popular. Biden's fault, much more popular. Right? Trump's tariffs, much more, or taking over the world, being king, much more popular. Right? And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you guys. All right? The story that you want to believe is the best story out there. That's it. Yeah, it doesn't matter what the truth is. It really doesn't. I know, right? I know, because telling the truth was really easy for me. I don't have to try and make anything up. It's awesome. I just tell the truth every single time, the way I see it, the way I truly believe it, and I never miss a step. Every single time I can come out and say the same things over and over again because it's what I truly believe. It's not something that I'm swaying in the wind with to try and tell the best story for the crowd to hear so I can follow their path of understanding. No, I'm clearly telling it the way I see it. And when I was telling the lumber story, I was telling the truth the way I see it. And because I was telling the best story along with the truth and the best story was rising to the top. That's what got me there. I know it. I look back. I was thinking about this all last night on how come it happened. Because now I come out and I tell the truth through all the documents that I see within the mainstream media, or between the Federal Reserve and the mainstream media, and now it's combative. People aren't out there going, what's going on with the monetary policy, like they were going on with like lumber. It's not the same question. They have a belief that was delivered to them about what has taken place with monetary policy. And both the mainstream media idea of what it is that's taken place and even the idea of the end the Fed crowd have both delivered a power pendulum to the Federal Reserve that ultimately saved them. And I know that story is probably impossible for most people to hear. So as I try to explain it and tell it, it is probably the worst story ever, even though it's the truth. All right? Like over and over again, starting all the way back with Ben Bernanke and the gold machine, this hypothetical gold machine, on how it was that they were going to use their words to deliver a monetary policy once the Fed funds rate had hit the lower bound of zero. As it starts to play out through history and you recognize it and you go back and you read the documents and you say, hey, something fell. And you go back and you read the documents and you say, this is what was happening back prior to the event. The communication that they were delivering about monetary policy coming to an end when the Fed funds rate hit the lower bound of zero, being out of ammunition, was something that was very well understood by the policymakers long before it took place. That is hard to understand. Most of us here on the Uneducated Economist channel, we really get it because I won't let it go, and I've said it over and over again, but for people to internalize the problems that the Federal Reserve was facing 20 plus years ago that are now coming to fruition in a way that they were very well understood, strategized, and delivered into the economy. There was no mistakes given. Not one mistake by the Federal Reserve. The mainstream media will not let you believe that. Most economists out there will not let you believe that. By not letting you believe it, it adds even more power to the pendulum, to the power of the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. We here get this. I've tried to explain it so many times through their own words and documents and everything else, but again, it's a pushback against what it is that's being told out there, and so therefore it's not the best story. It sucks, right? But I can't change the story. There's only one story that's right. You know? All right, so many people up in here. We have 16 minutes into this live stream and 119 people watching. Thank you so much for jumping into this. We got 36 people who have hit the like button. I believe it's also said in the Constitution, if you print greenback without gold reserves, penalty is hanging. I don't remember that being written in the Constitution, but if you go to Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution, it says that no state shall coin anything but gold and silver as a legal tender and payment of debt. So there is that. I don't remember reading that part. I'm not saying it's not there. I mean, I usually carry a copy of the Constitution. I guess I could look it up, but I don't remember that part being in there. But I do remember Article 1, Section, or Article 1, Section 10. What is it? Article 10, Section 1? I can't remember it now. You guys are going to have to look it up. But, Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution, I'm pretty sure that's it, says gold and silver shall be the only thing as a legal tender and payment of debt. That no state shall coin anything other than gold and silver as a legal payment. I'm pretty sure it's Article 1, Section 10. All right. Can you talk about, here we go. Awesome. Can you talk about the plan to just inflate the debt away and how the asset carrying class will not care about inflation because their assets at the same rate as inflation leaving? Okay. So Chuck Sanders 7131. I think the idea behind this is like they're creating an inflationary scenario on purpose in order to inflate the debt away, and this is some sort of benefit to the government, and it's pain and suffering upon us and misery. Now, I get that. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that's kind of like what it is that you're jiving at. Now, it does increase the value of the asset holders, and it pushed down upon the working class. And to understand that isn't necessarily in conjunction with inflating the debt away, although those two things take place at the same time. Like, to relate those two things together is this is happening and this is happening, put them together and talk about it in a singularity thing, right? And it's like, I don't really see it that same way, because it's the ever-increasing amount of money that is pouring into the system that has separated the rich from the poor. And so this has created this like major wedge. Now, you wouldn't have a problem with ever-increasing amounts of money putting into the system if you were producing things that you were selling out there to the world, and the world was sending you their gold. And that ever-increasing amount of gold coming into the system would give you a much better standard of living, and you would be very happy with that. So it's not a matter of the ever-increasing amounts of money coming into the system. It's your position within the economy on the timeline that we're in that is giving you a very upsetting feeling about what it is that's going on with the asset allocation that's going to the top, because that's what's going to happen if you have ever-increasing amounts of money coming into the system. All right. So now, inflating the debt away. Let's take what I just said and put it to the side for just a minute and talk about inflating the debt away. Now, the inflationary scenario for the government itself, like, yeah, okay, so you can inflate a debt away, but that's not really happening because the debt just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the ability to service that debt gets more cumbersome. So there is no inflating the debt away. It takes ever-increasing amounts of inflation in order to acquire the money you need to pay the debt. So there is no inflating the debt away, right? Does it happen to be in a direction in which that the economy can be like this ever-expanding operation in which that the ever-increasing amounts of inflationary pressures that come into it allow this to take place? Well, probably, until it doesn't take place. place anymore, and then there's this huge collapse, because that's ultimately what it is. It's cyclical, right? If we didn't have debt, we would have had gold, and if you have gold, you can only acquire so much of it before you've acquired all of it, and then you have to relinquish your wealth back out there. It's a redistribution. This is the Cantillon effect. I mean, he talks about it. Where's my book? It's the Cantillon effect, right? And so to understand that part of it is very like from what it is that's happening with the idea that the government wants inflation to inflate their debt away. We have a system in which that we had a gold currency that was going to be accumulated, concentrated, depressionary effects, and a redistribution. They said no, right? We're going to end the gold standard, and we're just going to pretend that U.S. treasuries act like gold, right? And then just issue out ever increasing amounts of U.S. treasuries. So here's the problem, is that if you have any direction other than increasing the amount of debt, then you're going to have a decreasing in the amount of currency that is out there. If you have a decreasing in the amount of currency, collapse begins to happen within the economy. No way will they make a decision to do that. Never, ever, ever. So it's going to be ever increasing amounts and expansion. Now, at what pace are they trying to prevent that? Like, there might be a little contraction, but it's mostly not really. Right? It's over ever increasing amounts of expansion. And so now these are two different things that we're looking at here, right? We got like so many different components that we're looking at. Why is it that we have inequality? Well, it's the ever increasing amounts of new money. Yeah, but it's more about the timeline we're on with the ever increasing amounts of new money. If we were an industrious nation with ever increasing amounts of new money that came in because we were production and saving, we would love it. We wouldn't be complaining. We wouldn't care about the inequality. We're running like, I mean, some of us might care about it, but most of us would be like, hey, whatever, go get a job and go to work, right? And pay your way. And everybody would feel comfortable with that because there was that capability. We were producer savers. We had great jobs. We produced this great stuff, sent it out there to the world, and the world sent us their gold. It was perfect, right? So we wouldn't care about the ever increasing amounts of new money so long as we were in a position, in a timeline within the economy that benefit us. The working class individual is not that person anymore. That's hard. It's heartbreaking. It's hard to say it. It's difficult to think about what it is my kids are going to do. If they are not very well aware of that, it's going to be a hard time for them. Now, who is it a benefit for? Ever increasing amounts of new money coming into the system isn't a benefit for the working class. It's a benefit for the asset holders. That's why they're doing so well. Right? So how do you, like, again, you know, you want to relate the two inflationary pressures coming in that then saves, like, you know, the federal, or saves the federal government on their debt issuance or whatever. Okay, that's one way to look at it. Ever increasing amounts of inflation is the money pouring into the system to keep the utter collapse from happening. Okay, well, that's another way of looking at it. You know, ever increasing amounts of inflation coming into the system creates this inequality, and now you got these asset holders that are sitting on a ton of money while the working class is suffering the consequences. Now you got three different ways of looking at this thing, right? Now, let's take all that for just a minute, set it aside, and bring up the Federal Reserve's monetary policy and the credible threat to need inflationary pressures to save their monetary policy. You set all that stuff aside for just a minute, right? Because there's three different ways to look at it over there. And we're going to introduce yet another way of looking at it, which is through the monetary policy itself, right? Not the government, not the debt issuance, not any of that stuff. The Federal Reserve has something called the Fed funds rate. Now, the Fed funds rate is the interest rate in which that is the overnight lending rate between the big banks. It does not necessarily impact the economy when they adjust it. Over time, 6 months, a year down the road, as that lowering of the overnight lending rate between the big banks starts to bleed into the economy, then you might find some pressures that come from that interest rate adjustment. 6 months to a year. It's called the lag period from the interest rate adjustment. Now, to understand this is very, very important. right? Because most people are looking at current information and thinking, what is the Fed going to do about this? You know, and I'm thinking, well, whatever they do, it's going to take 6 months to a year before it ever has any impact to it. So I don't know why we are so in discussion on what it is that's happening right now to cause the Fed's reaction, because that's not the way it necessarily works. Unless you look at it through the credible threat theory. Because now the delivery of information and the way that the market reacts to it is very well orchestrated. All right, so let's take it back for just a minute. The Federal Reserve would used to adjust, sorry, they still do. The Federal Reserve adjusts the Fed funds rate on the overnight lending between the big banks. This overnight lending between the big banks will essentially bleed out to the rest of the economy. When the Fed funds rate hits the lower bound of zero, there's no more monetary adjustment. That's it. They're out of ammunition, right? So now here it is, the Federal Reserve at the great financial crisis hit the lower bound of zero, promised zero interest rate policy for the foreseeable future, and took their balance sheet of $850 billion and fired off asset purchases that then expanded that balance sheet to over $4.5 trillion. That was insane amount of money printing. You thought COVID was a lot? The great financial crisis was way more on a percentage basis. Like, you want to talk about money printer go burr? That thing was like, Jerome Powell was just kind of spinning the wheel like this when it came to money printing last time. Before, they had the power machine hooked up, man. I mean, it was spinning hard. It was a huge amount of increase in the balance sheet. Now, the idea behind this is that a balance sheet expansion, massive money printing, belief of that causing an inflationary scenario raised the inflation expectations, especially the zero interest rate policy. We promise to keep zero interest rates for the foreseeable future. Money is free. All right? Now, everybody lost their nugget. Everybody did. And there was inflationary things that happened because ever increasing amounts of new money does what? Right? Separates the rich from the poor. So the asset holders, right? That went up. What didn't happen was wages. Very interesting. Everybody had a job, remember? Obama administration all the way through the Trump administration. Extra low unemployment, historically low unemployment. Trump backed it up. Best unemployment numbers in history since for 60 years. Nobody's ever done a better job than I have at creating jobs, right? I mean, I can't do Trump very well. Anyway, you know what I mean? I mean, there's like, that was taking place back then. And everybody was just like, woohoo, stock market's going nuts and prices of houses going nuts. And everybody was just like, you know, and he's talking about it's been awesome. It's going to be more awesome. There's no inflation. The Fed should be printing money. Remember that part? How many people remember that? Donald Trump, before he left office, during his first term, at the end of the last year of his first term, screaming, wanting to fire Jerome Powell back then because he wouldn't turn the money printer on. Remember that? Go into negative interest rates. Remember that? Anybody remember that? He did. That was Donald Trump screaming, the Fed should be printing money. Can you imagine the state of affairs we would be facing if they had followed Trump's leadership and printed up mass amounts of money and went into COVID and did even more money printing? We don't need to talk hypothetically. Let's talk reality. The reality is that's what he said. The problem that we were facing, not we, the Federal Reserve, the economy, is that there was no inflation. All that money printing, quantitative easing, Federal Reserve balance sheet expansion, all this stuff that was happening out there did not create an inflationary scenario. It failed the Fed. They were failing miserably, and they were scared. What do? Like, the Fed was stuck at the lower bound of zero with no inflation. They tried raising the Fed funds rate up. They got it up to about 2.5%, and the markets were just pissed. They were doing this autopilot program. I don't know how many people remember it because it was so long ago now, right? It's like if it hasn't happened within the last month, everybody kind of forgets. But way back then, right, they were on something called an autopilot program. This was before COVID kicked in. And they were letting the interest rates, the Fed funds rate, rise a quarter point every quarter for the foreseeable future. And so they were like, hey, regardless of what happens, whatever, we're just gonna go on this autopilot program. So, just kind of consider that to be the monetary policy from now on. And that's the way it was. Well, the markets got pissed. They hated that idea. And it got up to about 2.5%, and they were like, no, this is causing problems here. And so the Federal Reserve started to lower rates. And now this is before COVID. Remember, right? They peaked out, and I mean, I remember Peter Schiff was just like, he loved it. About face, right? And then I kept trying to say no, they just stalled out, they just stopped. But essentially, they did start, they did follow what it is that Peter Schiff was claiming, and because he's pretty well, he's got that pretty well good. So they started to lower interest rates to deal with this upsetted economy, and then only to find that COVID kicks in, and then they drop it down to zero again. So they were well on their way into a recession when COVID kicked in, and then it was blamed on COVID, the COVID-induced recession. And I'm like, no, we were headed towards recession. Everybody knew it. All the economists knew it out there. Peter Schiff was screaming his head off about it, right? And so we were definitely headed into a recession. The problem that we were facing is that there was nothing, literally nothing that the Federal Reserve could do about it. Dropping interest rates to zero wasn't going to do anything. See, typically before the lower bound, they would drop interest rates 5%. By dropping the Fed funds rate 5%, they were able to stimulate the economy. They could get corporations out there to borrow money to hire people, and that's ultimately what they would look to do. But when they were at 2.5%, they couldn't drop interest rates far enough to actually stimulate the economy. They, again, were out of ammunition. This is something that Ben Bernanke talked about back in 2002. It was something that I tried to share on this channel again, time and time again, as the beginning of the credible threat theory. So here it was, lower bound interest rates throughout, the quantitative easing programs of 1, 2, 3, and 4 after the great financial crisis, and it failed to produce an inflationary scenario. We know this because even Donald Trump was screaming there's no inflation, the Fed should be printing money, right? So it didn't have the inflationary pressures that they were hoping that it would. As they started to raise the interest rates to attempt to get some of their ammunition back, it totally upset the markets. As the markets got upset, they started to lower interest rates only to find that they were running into a recession that they would have no ammunition to deal with. And the fact that all the money printing and the lower bound of zero or in the zero interest rate policy didn't do it, what the hell were they going to have to try and stimulate the economy with? They were out of ammunition. Zero interest rate policy didn't work. Quantitative easing didn't work. Right? It didn't create the inflationary scenario that they were looking for. Now, we know this to be the problem. This is what John Williams was talking about in his speech, Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World. That was delivered in 2018. It's the problem that he was saying. We got an issue here, guys. Houston, we have a problem. Right? We don't have any monetary policy here. What they were needing to save their monetary policy, to get it back, was an inflationary period that ran persistently high. That was the only thing that they could use. And they were running into the next recession with no ammunition. COVID kicked in. Unusual and exigent circumstance. Boom. Money printing for stimulus packages done by the government because of the warlike effort that needed to take place in order to solve the problem of the pandemic. Every single supply chain got severed. What happened? Money printer go burr, stimulus packages went out, supply chain was severed, Everybody went and bought all the rest of the remaining supply. Supply-demand imbalances shot the prices through the roof. Inflationary pressures coming to save the day. The Federal Reserve loved it. Now, I don't think anybody would ever see that in any single word that they had ever stated after the pandemic started. But if you read their statements on everything that they were talking about prior to the pandemic, they were hoping and wishing and dreaming and praying for an inflationary scenario that ran persistently too high. Man, was that not delivered? I mean, think about it. They have a strategy. It's a 20-page document called the Makeup Strategy, where they were trying to figure out a way to push an inflation expectation into the people through music videos, social media posts, through online appearances at talk shows and stuff like that. It's crazy to think what it was that the Federal Reserve was looking and planning for, and then what COVID delivered. And as the mistake was made, right? Oh, the Fed went too far and too long, whatever. Inflation expectations began to rise, and the Federal Reserve sat back there and they were like, holy moly, this is working about better than we even thought. This is so strange for a lot of people to hear. I get it, because it's a story they never heard before. But the reality of the situation is that this started pulling the Fed funds rate up off the lower bound of zero and started regaining their ammunition. Like years and years operating at the lower bound of zero, massive money printing on a percentage basis, way more than what we received in COVID, failed to produce an inflationary scenario, but now it happens. This raised the Fed funds rate in order to combat the inflationary scenario, and now they got their ammunition. It's not at 5%. 5% would be typical. But what changed was the communication style of the Federal Reserve. So they figured out a way when they hit the lower bound of zero to change the way they operate monetary policy, knowing that they would not be able to adjust interest rates. They started using communication. And the monetary policy became more about communication than it did about interest rate adjustments. And again, this isn't me making this up. This is Philip Jefferson in a speech talking about communicating about monetary policy. I mean, he explains it very well in there. And so since they had changed their monetary policy from an interest rate adjustment monetary policy to a communication about an interest rate adjustment, now they can operate monetary policy within that lower range, below that 5%. They don't need to be at 5% in order to get a stimulating effect out of the markets. All they have to do is make the markets believe that there's going to be a lowering of interest rates going into the future. And not one out of panic, but one out of support for the economy, general support. See, this is funny because again, Philip Jefferson described exactly how that would work. How they can deliver a particular message that would have an easing or tightening to financial conditions. And again, I know this is really hard because it's not the story that most people are hearing. But the truth isn't necessarily the best story, is it? And it's funny because I think the truth is the best story. Because I guess I'm lame and I like boring things like Federal Reserve speeches in their own words to describe what it is that's actually happening out here, as opposed to conspiracy theory or misguided, misinformed mainstream media deliveries. What time is it? 39 minutes into it. We got 167 people watching. Thank you so much for joining in on this live stream. Lots of comments. Keep commenting and keep hitting that like button. If you hit that like button, the YouTube algorithm grabs the video, spreads it around for more people. Value is not determined by the system. It is determined at the individual level, not by the government. Everyone will switch over and you. No, they don't. Not redemption. You've totally misunderstood. All right. Solution is assessing higher intelligence via hash rooms, so we can figure out what the solutions are. Otherwise, we are too dumb to figure much of anything out. Well, I somewhat agree with it, but I don't think you necessarily need the shrooms and mush, the shrooms and the weed to do that. I think that really ultimately trying to hit a higher consciousness is something that is an individual, accomplishment all on your own on what it is that you feel that is taking place within your own thoughts and ideas. Because ultimately, your thoughts are your whatever it is you believe is the way it is. That's it. And so if you wanna believe it high on mushrooms and drugs and all that other stuff, like, so be it. Like, I have a caffeine-based consciousness. Like, I seem to be on caffeine all the time, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but it's just the way it is. And, someday I would like to experience this world without anything going on to see if maybe I can think a little differently than the way I am. But I love caffeine. I love coffee, I just love the feeling I get from it. I love the charge. I love everything about it. It's my thing, right? One day it'll be gone, and I'm willing to admit the fact that, what it does for me and what it is that I'm doing with it. However, right, I understand it. I understand that there's times when I've had too much of it. I understand that there's, like, times when you're not thinking the same way when you don't have it going on. If you are addicted to it and you are coming off of it, then you have a different consciousness coming off of it than you would when you are off of it, right? So there's all kinds of ways of thinking about things and, being on different substances, regardless if they're completely mind altering or just stimulating in ways. It's still a changing in that belief systems that are happening out there. So good, bad, or ugly, I guess that's up to you. But, for some of us, to actually see it in a very clear way, like ultimately the clearest, way possible, that means you can't have anything going on. It means you sit around for a while in a dark room with nothing, no light, no video games, no electronics, nothing going on, and you just sit there with your own thoughts until you purified them and you've overcome all the understandings that you are going with. Seems weird, right? Otherwise, you're just going to be influenced. And then it makes you feel sick and old afterwards. Yeah, it kind of does. Is that, it's funny, like, so every single day I eat an apple. I eat an apple after work, right? I usually eat it on the way home. But one day I forgot my apple and I left it on my desk. And so the next morning I saw it sitting there. I'm like, cool. So I ate it. Like, as soon as I got to work, I just ate this apple. I could not believe it. Like, I'm sure it was the sugar that was in it, but I could not believe the charge that I got off of it. It was like the greatest cup of coffee I'd ever had. I felt awake and alert and alive, and I was just like, screw coffee, man. All you need is just an apple. So, and the efficiency of getting going off of that thing was so much better than the cup of coffee that I had. And to kind of understand that sort of thing, that the older you get, the less likely you are going to be able to have a good and healthy experience by putting all the stimulus and drugs and everything else in you, right? The further you get away from that stuff, most likely you're going to live a more healthy outcome, right? If the damage is done by the time you get there, I guess it doesn't really matter. All right, moving on. Okay, enjoy the silence, Depeche Mode. One apple a day. I have eaten an apple every single day for, I don't even know how long, like a long time. And I eat the whole apple, the entire thing, like the core, the seeds, everything. Simon, you should read Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer. Think you'd love it. All right. Man, how am I going to remember that? All right. I have never tasted a bundle of cockroaches and don't want to. Yeah, I've tasted a bundle of cockroaches, but to be perfectly honest with you, like crickets or insects or anything like that doesn't scare me. I mean, like the idea of cockroaches kind of seems weird because I always just kind of related it to being grotesque, with like kind of filth and grime and stuff. But ultimately, like I'm not one who's like, Like, I don't give, like, you want to put a bunch of, grubs or something up there, as long as it's all done up in a soy sauce, whatever thing, and it's like meant to be eaten. I don't think I would have a problem with it. Now, to grind up crickets to make a protein base that we then consume, that is like a part of an ingredient to make other products out there, I think that's getting kind of weird. I wouldn't want that. But if it's like deliberate, like, hey man, this is like, a pile of roasted whatever, then I mean, like, yeah, okay, let's go for it. But as far as like a component on a like grand commercial food kind of thing, I don't, I like, now that I am like a little grotesqued out about, Uh, Alright, roaches are female, roaches are males. Or cockroach. Oh, is that how it works? Alright. Them seeds have cyanide in them. Yeah, I don't know. Like, whatever. Yeah. Arsenic, cyanide, all that other stuff, I mean, I whatever. What is it gonna build up over time and kill me or something like that? To be honest with you, I think about the time. What was it? Who actually said it? Was it J. Edward Griffin who talked about it? Apple seeds carrying some kind of anti-cancer treatment component or something in there. Layered B17. What was he calling it? I'm sure you guys seen it out there. The God, that was an old one too. How old was that? That was like, gosh, I want to say that was like late 90s, early 2000s. He put that one out. Uh, lateral. Is that how he say it? Simon doesn't care. I don't care about them seeds. I'll eat them seeds. I've even chewed them up. They actually kind of taste like almonds after a while. All right. Have you guys seen the new food pyramid? They flipped it upside down. Meat and eggs are at the top. Whole grains are at the bottom. Actually, Rasputin used to eat small amounts of arsenic to build up immunity, and then when they tried to poison him by putting arsenic in some cookies and treats, they had a little to no effect on it. Oh, wow, that's interesting. Okay, I think you're okay, deplorable. I think you're making it harder than it has to be, Simon. They doubled the price of everything and they screwed up the economy. That's what happened. Well, deplorable, then you won't be able to answer the lumber question or the oil. A barrel of oil is $57 a barrel. Lumber's at 520 per thousand. Like, they didn't double the price of everything. They didn't do that. So deplorable wants to take a simple, like, very reasonably, arguably logical answer to something that is not easily arguably answered like that, right? Down to supply and demand every time, you know? Like, I understand that people love to make fun of it and love the idea behind it, but as an individual who works a retail job, who works in the supply chain, who lives in one of the highest producing lumber states in the entire country. In fact, I think Oregon still is the highest one. Like, I see a lot here. I see it much differently than a lot of other people out there. And when I think about what it is that I communicate to and who it is that I've communicated with, right, I think about the differences that we experience here at the working class individual, boots on the ground, blue collar kind of view. It is so different than the Ivy League economists. They will never, ever, ever, ever be able to see it. Like, I can have a conversation with them and they would be like, huh, all right, because they just don't see it like we do. Not even close. Like, I actually got both Jason Hartman and Ken McElroy to both have that same reaction when I was telling them about how the neutral interest rate would rise, get ever closer to the Fed funds rate, making it less restricted on the economy. And that's one of the reasons why you have such a resilient economy. And both of them went, huh, interesting. All right. It's because they didn't think about it that way. It's because they just don't think like that. That's not the way that, like, I mean, I'm sure some of them could. Like, even, when I talked to Joseph Wing about it, yeah, like he had kind of the same reaction. Like, he knew everything that I was talking about. It wasn't like a surprise to him. It wasn't like I was telling him anything that he didn't already know. But the way that I was talking about it, it was just like, oh yeah, right? Because he's like up there with them, looking down. Like, I'm down here looking up, and it's a huge view difference. That's why I find it so interesting how my story seems to be so different from everybody else's, because I understand that pushing back against everybody else's story isn't a really fun story to hear, right? Like a story that nobody had ever told before, like a lumber story, that's a fun story to hear. But one that complicates it, one that's pushing back against what it is that you've already believed or put into your belief system, that one's very difficult. And then when I look at it from the view that I have, I think to myself, I'm just, we're just in a whole different, we're all, I guess we're in a different part in the economy, right? I mean, there's two different economies happening. You got the K-shaped economy. It's not even K-shaped, it's just two levels, right? You got them and us, the working class individual who will never make it into the ability of being a property owner. And then you got the asset holders who are the consumer now. So to think about it, it's like if you're up here looking at the economy, you're not down here. And if these two are trying to communicate with each other, they're going to be talking about two different things. That's why we hedge now. There's a reason metal prices are flying, inflation sticky, and government spending at all-time high. Everything is good until when it's not. Yeah, and that's, I mean, to be honest with you, that's exactly what the Federal Reserve would love for you to believe. I mean, they love that idea, brother. I'm telling you, they love it. And that's why it's difficult to tell this story to people, because they don't like being heard. They don't like hearing it. They don't like hearing that it's their fault creating the inflation. That's pain and suffering on us. And I'm thinking, yeah, I know. They knew that they were going to do it. And the more that you believe it and the more you think about it and the more painful it is for you and the more you talk about it, the more you add to the power that they need for their monetary policy. It's subconsciously, verbally, outright spoken, deliberately taken, all the stuff. They're covering all the bases. And once they've got it, then like it's so hard and it's so difficult to tell any other story that will push back against it. Like it literally gets to the point that, I mean, when I think about what it is that the Fed needed, and I think about what it is that the End the Fed movement was essentially trying to deliver, those two were compatible. They were symbiotic. The Federal Reserve was looking for inflation, and the Fed people were wanting to blame the Fed for inflation. And like that was like they those two worked together. I mean they literally do. That's why I find it so like amusing when I step back and I think to myself, man, what in the hell? How come it is that I see it this way and nobody else does? And I mean, it's not like I'm trying to make this thing up. This is literally coming from their own words. And so I'm like, how is it that John Williams in 2018 saying what we need is persistently high inflation, and then you got the End of Fed movement going over there, the Fed is causing inflation, the Fed is causing inflation. And the Fed was like, hey, we need higher inflation expectations. Right? We need higher inflation expectations. And the End of Fed movement is just like, yeah, end the Fed. Look, the Fed is causing inflation. Destroying the dollar, dollar weakening. Look. And the Fed's like, that's not enough. You got to do more. That's not enough. How, like, think about that story. That story is so hard for somebody to believe, especially if you're like one of these gold movement kind of people. To think that their story that they are trying to tell that sells gold is literally delivering power to the Fed with elevated inflation expectations. It's like, no way. Is that really happening? I mean, yeah, that's really happening. That is really happening. Counterintuitive and backwards from what it is that people would ever possibly believe out there. But that is what's happening out there. It's a very strange story, I know. All right? It's the strangest story ever. Once you see it, understand it that way, it looks so different, right? You look at it totally different. And you think about what it is that's happening out there with that neutral interest rate, because that's the most important component. That neutral interest rate rises, the economy becomes far less restricted. The top 20% of household incomes, they get to go on more consuming binge. You watch the wedge get driven and the inequality go worse and worse. People want to blame and excuse and look for like all the, to me, it's just like, man, there's reason. That's it. It's a reason that it's happening. And I understand the reason. I understand my position that I am in on the timeline within this economy. And I understand what it is that I have to do. Whether or not I'm able to accomplish it, that's a whole other thing. Like, we all have to get creative on that part. And the creative part is cutting back on your expenses. That's the creative part. People don't like to cut back on their expenses. They like to increase on their expenses. Well, this is a backwards economy. You have to go back against, you have to push back against what you feel. I want a brand new car. Go get a POS beater. All right. I want to take a fancy vacation, stay at home and read books. I want to, go out there and go out to eat, stay home and make yourself a meal. Like, go counter to everything that you have ever felt. And you might be all right, because what you're going to end up doing is securing a rate of interest beyond that of your occupation, because that's essentially what the top 10% and 20% are doing. So if you're not doing that, what are you doing? You're playing down here on the bottom side of the wedge. These are not asset allocate, they don't put their money towards assets. They don't try and figure out what it is they need to do to level up their skills or anything else like that. They complain about their job not being enough. Right? So you move into assets and then you start positioning yourself there regularly. Eventually you find yourself moving up onto that other side of the wedge because you become property owners. That's what ends up happening. So moving, cutting back on your expenses, securing a rate of interest beyond that of your occupation to eventually become a property owner. That's the only mindset that any individual should ever have. Blaming politics, blaming looking for excuses and all the other stuff, whatever. I mean, yeah, it's fun debate. It's fun to talk about, and it's good to pay attention to it. I mean, it really is. There's people out there who really enjoy paying attention to it. And for that, I believe they should, right? They should pay attention to it in a very good way. Like, I mean, a very serious way. But I got bigger things that I need to do. And so whatever decision that is being made out there, I understand that if it's one direction of money increasing, there's going to be inequality. I don't care what they try to do about it, right? If they increase the money supply, if there's ever increasing amount of debt issuance, as that is coming into the economy, there's going to be separation between the rich and the poor, and I got to figure out what to do about it. They can make up the laws, they can do all the stuff, whatever, I get it, right? Try their best. If they turn off the money supply, everybody's going to fall into pain and misery. And I understand the process in which I don't understand the process. I think I do. Time will tell, figure out what it is that we need to do in order to deal with that scenario as well. But outside of those two directions, increase of the money supply or decreasing of the money supply, those are the only two directions that I am really that focused on, because everything else is a symptom of those two problems. Everything is. And there's really nothing that you can do to stop it. Like, there's no way you're going to stop the inequality, and there's no way you're going to stop the greed. There's no way you're going to stop the corruption. You're not going to stop the fraud. You're not going to stop all that stuff, because those are symptoms of the ever-increasing amount of money going into the state. It's the results of it, right? And that's what happens. And I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm just saying that to expect anything else is naive. Right? It's unfortunate the way it is. It's just human nature, and it sucks. However, right? But we can understand what it is that's happening so that we have a better understanding of what we need to do. And by telling the best story, right? Like you can listen to the story of an economist out there who said the Fed failed and believe that story because that will be the truth. That will most definitely be the truth. Same thing with the end of the Fed story or any of the other ones. Now, the credible threat theory, in my opinion, is by far the most accurate one out there. It's the one that tells the same story continuously. It doesn't change. Right? You can go back and watch videos that I've been making for the last 7 years. And as we built up this credible threat theory, it doesn't change. Right? The lessons of it are the same. They keep teaching us more and more lessons that we add to the theory. And that's what I love about it. It's like, to me, it seems so like even the idea. It's like I look and I'm reading an article about how the Treasury Secretary is like, oh no, there's plenty of money to refund all the companies, all the tariff money, and I'm like, did you actually just say that? Like you're anticipating it too. What up, senor?
It's like 20
till 10? Till 11?
You gotta leave right now.
I gotta leave right now? What time?
What's the time?
Oh my gosh, okay. Gotta go, guys. Uneducated Economist, you let me know.